Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm ffinlo Costain. A Soil Association report has set out a vision for regenerative forestry, calling for more effective integration of farming and forestry and a larger number of tree species in commercial woodland. Robin Walter, the author of Living with Trees, co-wrote the report for the Soil Association. I asked him what he means by regenerative forestry.
So regenerative forestry is a kind of, it's a complement to regenerative agriculture, where we're trying to put back more than we take. So over the centuries, certainly in forestry, we've taken more than we've put back. We've ended up with very low forest cover in Britain. That's been restored to some extent over the last 100 years. But obviously the forests we have now are quite different from what we lost. A forest which is dedicated solely to producing timber tends to deplete other indicators. So, for example, all the indicators are going down for forestry, sort of woodland birds, insects, invertebrates, things like that. So rather than taking more than we give, we need to actually give back more than we take. So in forestry, this means trying to create forests that are rich in biodiversity. They're rich in carbon, both in the soil, in the standing timber, and in the harvested wood products that come out of them. And they're good for people. So the report focuses on, yes, climate and nature and people are the three main focuses.
I'm fascinated by that historical perspective. We tend to think of deforestation as something new, don't we? But in fact, it's been going on for a very, very long time.
Oh, yes, certainly in Britain, one tends to, the popular view is that there were forests up until, I don't know, ships were built for Nelson a couple hundred years ago. But actually, from sort of peak wildwood after the last ice age, some sort of 4,000 years ago, actually the Neolithic agricultural revolution took care of most of the deforestation. By the time the Romans came, there was about 20% cover. Then Oliver Rackham famously calculated about 15% cover in Doomsday. So that's 1086 AD. And since then, it's gone down to about 5% around 100 years ago. Then the Forestry Commission and other players increased that to around about 13% today. So we've certainly taken more than we've given over the millennia. We've put back quite a bit in the last 100 years, but obviously that's quite different from what we lost.
Yeah, it's interesting to understand things in that context, because if we think of Britain with a much smaller population back in history, even then we were plundering those resources, but gradually our population's increased, our deforestation has continued, and although there's been some level of reversal in the last 100 years, it does raise the question of whether we can ever produce enough timber for our needs.
Well, that's a very good question. We import about 80% of our timber. We're the second or third or fourth highest importer of timber. China is way ahead as the first. And then there's a cluster of kind of G7 countries, I think, Britain and Italy and Japan, I think, are in the next sort of cohort. Yes, we're a sort of advanced industrial economy. We use a vast amount of timber, and we don't have, we only have 30% cover, as I say, and even that is underutilized. The hardwood, so the broadleaf area is not not widely harvested, and in some cases shouldn't be, but there's scope for more there, and the conifer resource is harvested, but there just isn't much of it. So yes, I think we should be producing more of our own, for sure.
Now, you've talked there, as you have in the report, about the need for new timber sources. Now, we're a small island. Where do you think these new plantations should go?
Well, we certainly need a sort of comprehensive land use strategy. And I noticed in the last few years, every month a new land use strategy comes out from some quarter, contemplating where things should go. They often don't think about timber. Actually, they quite rightly focus on farming. it covers 70% of the land. So that's by far the biggest nut to crack, so to speak. But yes, where is the timber going to go? Well, in the report, the Soil Association call for what they call a farmer-led tree planting revolution. Already 1/3 of our forest cover, so that's about 1 million hectares of forest, is on what's designated agricultural land, so which includes private estates and farms. And the Soil Association have an ambition to double that. So that's another 1 million hectares. Now, of course, you don't want trees planted on, grade 1, 2, and 3, food producing land, because of course, all the demands on timber are also on food. You'll know better than me how much of our own food we produce. And of course, in the last couple of years, we've had the invasion of Ukraine. Can we rely on global supplies of food anymore? Obviously not. Can we rely on global supplies of timber? Probably not. So we're in a whole new world of increased demand and question marks over the kind of globalized supply. Yes, so the short answer is agricultural land, but carefully selected. I mean, probably grade 3B and 4. Grade 5, it tends to be peatland, which has its own characteristics and should be preserved and restored. Extremely rich in carbon, far richer in carbon than forests. So, one shouldn't be planting on that. I mean, a lot was back in the sort of heydays of plantation forestry. And where those forests come to maturity, actually, often it's best not to replant, but to restore it to peatland. And obviously they have great wildlife characteristics as well.
So when you're talking about growing trees on that much more land, are you thinking about integrating woodland and food production, or using separate land for food and forests?
Yeah. So is it kind of either or can we integrate it to the farm landscape? Well, I'm a great fan of integrating. I think there is a case. There's certainly a case for taking the least productive areas, entirely out of agriculture and putting them into productive forestry. By which I don't mean pure Sitka. Perhaps we'll come to that in a minute. But and again, the Soil Association have been very vocal on integrating trees to the farm landscape in the form of agroforestry. So this is sort of trees around the margins, shelter belts, strips, all alternate strips of strip cropping of cereals interspersed with trees, as they do in France, extensively. And it's quite interesting. The Soil Association are running a project at the moment, pilot projects for not converting, but applying agroforestry to farms. And they're looking out for, sort of trial areas to look at. I also noticed that the Forestry Commission are recruiting 10 agroforestry officers to advise on agroforestry, in all corners of. I think that's England only. Actually, that one, because it's a devolved administration. So certainly, there's a lot of interest. I realize that farmers are good at farming and might not be that interested in forestry, but perhaps I'm doing them a disservice.
Now, regenerative forestry, as I understand it, has integration at its heart. But many people in the forest sector would say that the most efficient way to lock in carbon and meet domestic timber requirements is through conifer plantations. Are they wrong?
Yeah, it's complicated. It depends. It depends what you measure and at what point you measure it, and what the counterfactuals are. What land you're planting on. The report mostly talks about how to treat existing stands of timber. There is, of course, an argument for more, greater forest cover, and how would one plant, in anticipation of regeneration. And of course, diversity is really the main factor there, a mix of species. Our timber industry has tended to focus on a single output, which is, high grade saw logs, or at least saw logs. Hopefully, some of them are high grade, and so to the exclusion of people, biodiversity, all those. Well, in fact, and even carbon, because it wasn't an issue back in the 50s. Well, I mean, it was. We just didn't know it. So these days, you might be able to maximize one output timber by planting pure Sitka spruce. It grows much faster in difficult places. The difficult places it's allowed to grow, where the land isn't needed for other things. It produces by far the most timber. But as I say, all the kind of indicators are showing that focusing on one thing, is not really sustainable, and we need to up our game. And really, we need to think about what are the carbon implications, what are the biodiversity implications, what are the social implications? Because of course, conifer monocultures are not popular, and they were famously stopped up in the flow country. That was really in '88. That was really the end of the kind of conifer planting boom. And since then, forestry has been trying to regain its reputation as a sort of acceptable social practice. And it's gone a long way to doing that and hasn't really got the credit for it. But I envisage a time when people will be crying out for forestry and woodland plantations in their parish, in their valley, in their area, because they'll see how wonderful woods are.
And just finally, Robin, in your view, what are the biggest impediments and the biggest opportunities in terms of driving that change that you want to see?
I think actually just that last point I was on, it's really having a vision and a culture which will enable this. I mean, yes, we can look at sort of land strategy reports and count up the hectares of grade 4 land and make plans on maps. It's always easy making plans for other people's land and other people's livelihoods. And I realize, it's actually farmers on the ground who are going to, be planting and tending these trees and handing them on to future generations. So we should be mindful of that. But it's really imagining a land with more trees in it. And once one has an idea that, oh yeah, this could work, if that land over there could be a productive oak plantation. Yeah, it's going to take 100 years, but we need to start now. Or this huge arable field might do better with a shelter belt around it and maybe some strips down the middle. And actually, our cattle might do better with a bit of shade and shelter. All of this has had studies done about improving stock condition and diet and all those kinds of things. So it's really imagining it. Of course, there are grant schemes, and I realize that's a really hot topic at the moment. The ELM scheme, is it actually going to succeed in steering farmers toward what the government think is needed? Is that really the right way? I mean, obviously, your other podcasts and interviews have covered this extensively. So that's part of a much bigger conversation about agricultural land use. But I mean, I think trees need to be a part of that, because we should have. I mean, I would go far further than the government in their rather modest targets of increasing trees and go for more like 30% cover. But then I'm a bit of a nutter on that. So but yes, where would they go? How are they going to integrate? But first, we have to imagine it and think, yes, this is something we want. And for those forests actually to be places people want to go, want to see, want to work. And I think if people want it, it'll happen. If people think, oh, it's just dark conifers owned by someone else of no benefit to local people or the owner, then it's going to be an uphill struggle.
That was Robin Walter from the Soil Association. More news on our website, 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.